And welcome everybody to episode 104 of the Paws Up podcast as we keep marching on here, getting plenty of awesome guests from all around FIU athletics. And today is absolutely no exception. It's been a long time in the making, but we're happy to welcome the head coach of FIU women's basketball, Jesyka Burks-Wiley, who is entering her 6th season as the head coach of the Panthers. How you doing, Coach Burks?
I'm doing well. How are you all doing?
Excited to have you on.
Yeah,
it's mutual.
Yeah, we're stoked. We're stoked. It's been a dream for us to try to get every coach on, and we're definitely trying to do that. It's been a hot minute since we've had the chance to cover women's basketball. I believe the last person we had was Kalia Henderson, which was back. That was episode 55, April 11th of last year. So it's been a hot minute. So we're happy to have you on, Coach Burks.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into Coach Burks, the coach, we have to talk about Burks, the player. Talk about where your love for the sport began growing up over in Kansas City, and when did you realize this was something you absolutely had to pursue?
Well, I grew up in a basketball family. On my mother's side, my grandfather is one of the original Globetrotters from when they were the Harlem Magicians.
That's so sick.
I kind of kicked it off for everybody. And then my uncle played at the University of Washington and played for Seattle. I actually have a little cousin who currently plays. Well, I shouldn't call him little. He's bigger than I am at this point. Plays for the Miami Heat and Alec Burks. So It was kind of a family trade. And so, I have to give my mother tremendous credit. She didn't force me into it. It was kind of like, we're going to try a couple things and, see what you stick to. And basketball, it fit like a glove. So, like I said, it's been kind of a family trade as long as I can remember. And so it's taken me all over the world. It's opened some really incredible doors for me. So any chance I get to pay it forward, I like to.
Now, I wanted to highlight your time over at Boston University. You became, one of a handful of players to record 1,000 points and 500 boards for the Terriers. Talk about some of your favorite memories over there, dropping big buckets over in Boston.
I absolutely loved my time in college. It truly, honestly kicked off me wanting to become a coach myself, because I came in as a very out of shape, very undisciplined, 17, 18-year-old, and was able to leave, by the end of my career as, one of the best players in women's basketball history from, as you mentioned, 1,000 points, 500 rebounds to, being an All-American. And so being able to, just grow tremendously as a person, as a player. It was the first time I had ever been that far away from home. And so, it allowed me to get some really just absolutely mind-blowing experiences. But on top of it, I got to play with some people who were, they were in my wedding, so I got to forge really great relationships. But man, I absolutely loved my time at BU. Ended up being a bigger bucket than I think I expected to be. I think my coaches had a much bigger vision. I was just happy to play. I was like, I just want to get on the floor some way, somehow. And so I always give them tremendous credit of finding a way to, really carve me into a heck of a player during my time there.
Bang! There we go. Let's get it. Oh, that's sick.
Now that's a throwback right there, man. Oh, that's pretty good.
We did this to Willie too, Willie Simmons, and he was like 3 sons. Coach, what were some pieces of advice, life lessons that you took away from your time at Boston University? Obviously, you mentioned it. Go in there as a young 17-year-old, and then you come out, probably more mature and now, looking ahead of life.
I think the 2 biggest pieces I took from my time there was, one, definitely the value of working hard and working consistently. It's easy to come in and, in a 7-day week to be good for 2 out of the 7 days. Great players, they're able to string multiple days together and finding the value in that. And so I definitely was able to really, really understand the beauty in working hard, taking pride in the work. It may not bear fruit right away, but still take pride in being great at doing the work, so definitely learn that. And then also just learning that you've got to be your biggest cheerleader. That was something Coach Greenberg, I think, did such a tremendous job of, when you're young, especially in my early years playing there, I wanted to play well because I want to make Coach Greenberg happy. I want her to play me, and she did such a great job of instilling in me. She was like, don't be confident for me, be confident for you. And so that completely, I mean, it was like a 180 as far as my mentality. And so I was like, okay, like, I think I can do it, so I'm gonna do it, and so being able to have that mentality, all through 4 years, it allowed me to go on and play pro. It allowed me to be where I am now. So those are definitely the two things I took away the most was, definitely the value and taking pride in wanting to work hard consistently. And then you got to be your biggest cheerleader. If you're constantly playing for the applause, it's just never going to be enough. But if you are every single day making yourself proud, that's a life worth living right there.
After your time at Boston, you spent a few years overseas. You played in Romania, Finland, and in Portugal. Just talk about that experience playing, overseas, having to adapt to a new culture, different type of game, I'm assuming. So what was that like?
It was amazing. Definitely coming from 4 years where, I obviously had been developed, but it was still a comfort zone. You pretty much know every year what it's going to bring to going overseas. And, as you mentioned, Kevin, completely different culture, completely different styles of play, completely different menus, and having to adapt right away, it was such an incredible experience. And I tell all of our players, I'm like, even if you just go for a year, go. You get to live in a different country. You get to gain a new perspective, go and do it. It's an experience you'll never regret, and it ended up also being just a blessing in disguise because now I have the fortune of coaching at, one of the most diverse universities in the world and with one of the most diverse teams, in the world. And
absolutely,
I share with our kids all the time. I'm like, how impressive it is. I was fortunate enough to go and play overseas. I was 21. I was, an adult in my mind, but to, commit to a mission like that at 17, 18, like that's impressive. That takes confidence. And so, whenever some of our international kids are having tougher days, I'm like, you've done the hardest part, baby. You got on the plane. Yeah. There are so many people who couldn't even do that, and you've already done that. So that experience, in itself was incredible and really growing and mind-blowing for me. But I definitely think it ended up being a blessing in disguise because it's allowed me to have so much more respect and understanding of the young women I get to coach now.
I did want to circle back real quick to your time in Boston because college basketball, really just college athletics, have changed so much. How different would you say being a college player was then in the mid 2000s to now with the addition of the transfer portal, of NIL, of all those assets?
Well, Jake, you didn't have to give a time frame. You could let the people guess a little bit. No, I think the biggest thing that's just different from that time frame to now is I think you definitely had to trust the process a bit more there. And I don't think you were really allowed to explore any other avenue. It was kind of like, if something didn't work, you kind of, it didn't work, babe. Like that's just kind of what it is, as opposed to the era of the portal now where I think, you hear so many mixed views, and I have mixed views as a coach. Monday, I love it. On Wednesday, I'm like, close it now. What are we doing? But I do think it's great that kids are allowed to find a better fit. I do think that is, no person can tell you at 17, 18, you're going to make a perfect decision that's going to help you for the next 40 years. If a 17 or 18-year-old had that type of perspective, a lot of us wouldn't have jobs right now. They usually don't gain that perspective till later down the line. And so that's where I think it is great. Now kids can be like, hey, this isn't a good fit. Hey, let me go find somewhere that's, maybe a better fit for me and allow me to have the career, athletically and academically that's more fitting to me. But I do miss in the times of, I think, in my era, which, I'm aging myself 1,000,000% right now, but I do think just the camaraderie was a little bit different. I think we're in a space now where you do have a lot of turnover, and we've normalized the turnover that you don't see super classes anymore, where it's like, man, that class, is the winningest class in history, or that class did this, that class had 6 straight, or 4 straight NCAA appearances, things of that nature. They're becoming just less and less because turnover is becoming more and more. And so that is something I do miss from my time in playing was, I loved suiting up, and I knew who I was going to play every single year in conference. I knew who that team signed. I knew, who they were returning, and it allowed that rivalry and that fire to just grow every single year. And so that is something I think that has been a little bit lessened in this, in this recent era of college athletics. But with that being said, I do think it's great that kids can go somewhere and have a great experience, and I tell coaches all the time, I'm like, if you're bitter about a kid finding a way to have a great 4 years, like that's a you issue. Because I had an outstanding 4 years. And so the last thing I would ever do is want to rob a kid of having that same experience.
Made a
I believe it was Atlantic 10, right? Is that the conference?
America East. Close.
America East. Okay, I got you. Gotcha.
Talk about some of your coaching stops, most notably USF with Jose Fernandez, what you learned from him, what was that experience like, and eventually taking the job here at FIU?
It was an absolutely amazing experience. I was coming in I was coaching at Boston College where, ACC, women's basketball, some of the highest level there. You're going against Notre Dame's, the Louisville's, the NC States, just talk about basketball at an absolute incredible level. And, I'll never forget, when Coach Fernandez interviewed me, he was like, why do you want to work here? I know we're top 25. I know it's Tampa. I know all of this, but why do you want to work here? And I was like, all right, Jesyka, we're going to have to put our cards on the table with this one. And, I was completely honest with him. I was like, I want to be a head coach one day, and I don't want me or my program to be a flash in the pan. And I was like, you have figured out how to do this over multiple decades. I was like, so I've been a part of a rebuild at that point. I've been a part of burn it down, at that point. But outside of a player, I had never been a part of a program that just had such incredible sustained success across the board with its staff, with its players, academically, athletically, their kids transitioning to become professionals, their, kids transitioning to become doctors and lawyers, Coach Fernandez has done such a great job of just allowing excellence to flourish in his programs during your time there and after. And so I was like, I want to learn from that. I'll earn my keep, but I want to learn because that's what I want for my program. And he looked at me over his little glasses and he says, okay. And I remember calling my husband. I was like, yeah, I didn't get the job. I was like, you can go ahead now, or we're going to be in Boston another year, And so was really fortunate the next day to get a call, offer me the job. And it was 3 of some of the most incredible years I could have asked for in my coaching career. I mean, I got to learn so much from X's and O's to staff management to community relations to, campus relationships, being able to coach players, Kitty Alaksa, who's playing for the Mercury right now. I had just missed Courtney Williams, but she was still coming back and doing workouts. And so being able to be up close and personal with lottery picks, and seeing how they trained and seeing the mentality, it was truly transformative for me as a coach. So I'd never think I always tell you, you're never ready to be a head coach, but that, USF definitely made me excited to want to be a team.
Talk about FIU. When did they reach out? And, what made you want to take that job? And when you got there, what were some of the things you noticed? Obviously, the program's grown immensely from when you first took the job up until now. What was it like when you took that job?
When FIU, I'll be honest, it always kind of been a job in the back of my mind. I know the recent, years before we got here, I had some struggles, but I was like, man, I feel like you got so much to offer there, but I was kind of like, all right, not my business, mind the business of mine, and so when they, FIU reached out, I was super excited. I knew that at that point, if I was going to transition somewhere as a head coach, I wanted to go somewhere where my kids didn't have to choose. I wanted them to get an outstanding degree. I wanted it to be in a very competitive conference, and I wanted it to be ideally in a great location. Up until USF, everywhere I lived was cold. And so I finally got there and I was like, oh, winter is optional? Oh my God, I've never doing this. And what was I thinking before this, And so I was like, man, I'd love to be able to, tack that on, with their experience. And so, coming in, and at that time, FIU was top 50. I mean, look at where we are now in just in short years, So I was like, great, checks that box. And then CUSA, top 10 conference in women's basketball. You've got some absolute powerhouses. I'm not going to say any of their names, but they know who they are. We were some pretty good teams in our conference, that really forge you and help you become a better program and prepare you for the NCAA tournament. I didn't want to be in a conference where I'm like, great, we'll go undefeated and then we'll get smacked in the first round. I was like, I want a conference that's going to prepare us to be competitive in NCAA tournament, competitive in the, NIT, competitive in the WBIT now, and USA checked that box, and then I looked and I was like, campus isn't too bad either. You're about 20 minutes from Miami, downtown Miami. You got pretty much beaches in every direction you can think, and so it just checked so many boxes. And so, I will always be forever in debt to FIU just because, even with the program being in a space of needing redirection, still had a lot to offer. And for them to take a chance on a young coach, who had never moved over, one seat, I will forever be grateful. And so, I'm really proud of the work that we've done here. I'm more grateful that I've gotten the time to make that transition. And I'm really glad that I'm hopefully making FIU very, very proud in their hire.
Well, now that you live here in South Florida, have you gotten used to used to the weather here compared to your previous stops?
Oh my goodness, yes. I tell people all the time, I don't have to shovel humidity. So
nice.
I don't have to shovel humidity, I can live with that. I don't have to scrape humidity off my, off my windshield at 7 a.m. So I've got no issue with it. I'm absolutely loving it.
I might have to steal that quote. That was a really good quote.
That was great. Yeah.
That was sick. But speaking of sick, there was an unfortunate timing when you joined FIU in 2020. It had to coincide with the COVID-19 pandemic. Just talk about your mindset during that first year, trying to lead a new squad to their first winning season since 2012, which you did, while trying to keep yourself and the players as healthy and safe as they could be.
I honestly have to give so much credit to that team and my staff at that time. I was coming in, like I said, a green head coach, and you, of course, you're a head coach, you got all these big hopes and I'm going to do this. And then you have a worldwide pandemic, and so going into that, you had to reroute quickly just because the world was in a space that, definitely any of our generations had ever experienced before. And so I have to give those kids so much credit just because the amount of discipline it was going to take for us to get out of the hole we were in, the commitment it was going to take. And we're asking 18 to 22-year-olds to be incredibly disciplined and a city that I love that wasn't the most respectful of that time in the world, but I'm asking them to, shelter in place and, be segregated from, other sports and things of that nature. And so it took a tremendous amount of discipline on their behalf, especially with something that wasn't guaranteed. I can ask them to do all these things. Doesn't mean we were going to win. I mean, I kept you safe, which at 18 to 22, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about memories and having fun and, all that. You're not thinking about, necessarily, what's the safest option right now. And so the commitment that they made to allow us to get that momentum, to, allow us to climb the conference we did, it was surreal, and I look back and I tell, younger coaches that I have the fortune to mentor, I'm like, the only regret I have of that year is I wish I had taken more time to just breathe it in. I think I am so focused on keeping everybody healthy, keeping everybody safe. We got to turn the program around because, at that time, our senior class, they had never had a winning season before, which was like heartbreaking for me because I'm like, you've played 4 years of basketball and you've never had a winning season, like that just shattered me inside, so I had that, on my back of they've got to have a, this got to be it. This is it for them. They got to have a winning year, and so the commitment it took from an incredibly, very, for lack of better words, that demographic, that age group, you guys are supposed to be selfish. It's supposed to be about you. And I encourage our kids. So I'm like, if there was ever a time in your life to be selfish about your development, it's then, baby. I'm asking them to truly give up everything for the greater good. And those kids did such an outstanding job of doing that, like I said, I know I won Coach of the Year, but that was by far Team and Staff of the Year without a doubt.
Absolutely. But speaking of Coach of the Year, I think all of us still fondly remember that 2023 season. 21-12 regular season record, a dub in the WNIT over, I believe, Stetson.
Yeah.
And that Coach of the Year award for you. Where would you rank that team as far as talent in the list of squads you've been a part of over the past decade or so?
Yeah, that definitely, I would say it was definitely one of the most talented, but I think by far one of the deepest teams I've had. You go back and you reflect on teams, and I feel like the years we've been here, we always have a solid 5. I'm always going to give you at least 5 or 6 that, are going to give you a run for your money. But that team, I mean, we could go almost 10 deep, which, like I said, looking back was incredible. I had never experienced that outside of being an assistant coach. And so having that type of continuity that deep within our team was really special, and I think for our kids more so, it was great for them to see, because some of them had been in those earlier days where we were knocking on the door and we knew it was possible, but it just, the engine wasn't quite turning over, and so when it fully turned over that year, I was so excited because, sometimes you wonder like, okay, this lady keeps telling me this is possible and this is possible, but, we're just knocking on the door still. And so when that year came about, I was like, oh, finally. And like I said, to have that continuity that deep into our team, it was special. It was special. And I think it allowed for us, being a new program, to now we could sell that. Because before we were just selling hopes and dreams. Now we could truly sell a mission. Like, no, this is what it looks like. This is what we're doing. This is why we do things the way that we do. So that year was by far the most special I've had since I've been here.
Talk about last year, obviously a little tough. Injuries, huge for you guys. I mean, Maya Kone only played one game. And, big players that you brought in, unfortunately, just weren't able to suit up for the entire season, but still get to the conference tournament. I believe it was Western Kentucky. You guys played in the first round, played them tough. Fortunate to work out. Just talk about that year.
Obviously not the year from a wins and losses standpoint that any of us anticipated, and like you said, Kevin, I mean, I hate to say it, that probably was, if we were healthy, that would have been the most talented team I think I would have had during my time here. Yeah. But, sometimes I think God sends you things for a reason. And I think before that time, we had talked about, oh, we have a good culture. Oh, we have a good culture. Oh, we have a good culture, And it's easy to say you have a good culture when you're building, because everyone expects in a building phase, things are difficult, but you're building, it's okay. And it's easy to say you have a great culture when things are 21-12 and, you're making all this history. Of course, they've got a great culture. Look at the record, It's not till you've got 2 all-conference kids out, preseason player of the year is out. It's like, okay, if we're going to see how good this culture is right now, because we have been pretty much leveled in the things that we have been saying was our good culture, and the way those kids showed up every single day with joy, because you can show up and be a shell of yourself. It's another thing to show up with joy and intentionality and be engaged. And they did that, I mean, in spades and all year, and so that for me, I think was necessary for us in our program to understand that winning comes in many forms. And I think coming off such a great year of winning on the court, it's consuming. Winning is addictive. It's better than anything. There is not a food, there is not a location in the world that's better than winning, in my opinion. And so coming off a year where we had, been able to feel that in mass, to coming to a year where it was like, ooh, okay, like this is desert right now. It forces you to have to find the wins in other ways, and so that's where I am so grateful for that group for last year, for the season for last year, because it allowed us to really solidify that, oh no, we have a great culture. Like, we have great kids, like we have a great culture, because if we didn't, that was a perfect moment for those young ladies to check out, for things to turn, for them to turn against us. It could have gone completely south, and they refused to do that. It was like obscene for even that to cross their mind. They were like, of course not. Like, we're here. We're going to work. We're going to do what's necessary. So that for me was it was a very proud moment as a coach that, hey, wins didn't come in the form that we had definitely recruited towards, but my goodness, just the emotion and the intentionality of that group was, it was special, guys. And so, having a senior that she was on the fence of if she was going to play pro, she's already across the water now. Like in my book, that's a win. Especially after winning 10 games, I'm like, you love basketball still. I'm like, all right, but that showcase, like, okay, she enjoyed her experience here. So that for me was like, okay, I needed to see that up close and personal as a coach, that no, we are doing things the right way for the right reasons. We're not just doing this because we're in hopes of winning. We're doing this because we want our kids to have a great experience. And even in the midst of a tough basketball year, it was still an awesome experience for our kids.
I think I already know the answer to this, but if you had to pick one game specifically that best summarized how good this team could have been if everything was clicking and the team was still relatively healthy, what game would that have been? I know it might not be. It would probably be hard not to say the first game against Florida National because of how outrageous the scoreline was. But what would you say it would be?
I'd probably have to say that, which is tough because, Florida National, very well run program, but, we are just a different caliber of team, versus them. But I think once again, it would have just showcased our depth and our versatility. I mean, we were going to be able to just massacre people in multiple ways, and so I know the opponent probably wasn't the most formidable, in that moment, but I think nothing else is showcased for us that, man, like they have weapons in many forms, in many ways. So definitely, times I look back and I'm like, oh, what could have been? But then I look back and be like, you know what? We're doing it right. So what means we can't do it again?
128 points or 132, I should say. That is insane. That is like you hardly say it in the NBA, let alone at the college level. That's crazy. Alrighty, Kevin. Normally I'd say it's time for a news break, but we got soccer rolling around here, so I think it's time for a quick look around FIU athletics. What do you say?
Yeah, we're getting close, right? I mean,
we're getting awfully close. It's time for a look around FIU athletics. Who to watch from the 305? Getting emotional. It's the first around athletics in the triple digits for us, but we have some sports to talk about here, starting off with FIU women's soccer. They are heading to Tallahassee to take on the Florida State Seminoles on Sunday, August 17th at 7 p.m. Now, to clarify, this episode was recorded way ahead of time, so we don't know what station it'll be televised in, but just keep an eye out. It'll probably be on ESPN Plus, one of the networks there. Definitely just keep an eye on that just to make sure. After a few days, both men's and women's soccer will be busy on Thursday, August the 21st. FIU men's soccer will host the Omaha Mavericks over at Leyva Family Field at 7 o'clock. If you can't make it, the match can also be seen on ESPN Plus. That one is confirmed to be on that station. Meanwhile, FIU women's soccer will look to continue their Northern Florida road trip at Jacksonville as they take on North Florida, the Ospreys, over at 7 p.m. So that was kind of brief look around FIU athletics, but we're still just getting into high gear with soccer and obviously football. It's a stone's throw away at this point. So, Coach Burks, the 2025 season is fast approaching for FIU women's basketball. It won't be long before we start to get into the hype that is hoopla over there at the gymnasium. What are some of the expectations you and the rest of the coaching staff have placed on the roster, as well as each other, to make sure that everyone's the best version of themselves they can be?
I think for us, a big thing we've been really, really emphasizing with our girls is, I think with the personnel that we've been able to retain and the personnel we've been able to acquire, really, really being hyper focused on really getting back to our identity, with us being, bit injury riddled, not even a bit injury riddled last year, we had to adjust who we were as a team, and it was crazy talking to different coaches on the road, and they were like, yeah, like it was so different doing your scout this year, because it's like, wait, they're not going to press us for 40 minutes. They're not going to do this. They're not going to do that, so definitely looking forward to really getting back to our identity, but really kicking it into high drive. Like I said, with the young ladies we were fortunate enough to have return, them having a year of who we are under their belt, I think is going to be tremendous, and that's something within our program. Usually for a kid from year 1 to year 2, you see them have big jumps just because they adjust and they understand the expectations. And we have a fun style of play. So now that you've got understanding, it is a fun style of play. It usually allows them to have a great amount of growth. But then the young women we've been able to recruit and bring into our program, I think are really just a glove fit to who we are as a basketball program and who we've been. So definitely really getting back to our identity, as a program. And then, like I said, just kicking it into hyperdrive.
Talk about some of your returners. You mentioned it. I mean, transfer portal is tough for everyone, especially group of 5 schools, mid-majors.
Yes.
Our conference is now looming, but talk about the girls you were able to retain and, some help there too, with depth, and obviously you're able to spread the floor with a couple of them a little bit with 3-point shooting. Let's talk about who you're able to retain and how big they're going to be for you this season, not just setting the culture, but also, now knowing your style of play, as you noted.
Absolutely. No, I'm really excited about our returners. I'll start with our babies. And Date and Claudia, definitely, I think, had a very prototypical freshman years. They had some great moments, and they had some moments where I'm like, she's 18. Okay, here we go. And so they both had phenomenal summers. So I'm really, really excited about them being able to make that jump from freshman to sophomore. That was a big thing we talked about in their postseason meetings is freshman year, you're just trying to survive. Like, it's just, I joke, just keep swimming. That's what freshman year is. Just keep swimming. As long as you're swimming, you're not sinking. And that's okay as a freshman, as opposed to once you get into that sophomore year, it's about thriving. Because now there's no more fear of the unknown. There's no more, can I do this? You can do it because you survived it. Now it's a matter of, okay, now how can I thrive in the expectations that I know are set ahead of us? So I'm really, really excited about those two. Fantasia James, she's one, I always joke, she's one of my gray hair babies because Fantasia is probably a Sour Patch Kid at its finest because she'll make some plays, that, man, if nobody in the gym is going to be able to make those plays, but then she'll make some plays that I'm like, Fantasia, nobody in the gym would ever make that play, so having her, find that balance of like, what, from wow to what, like getting a little bit more on the wow side of it. And so a big thing her and I talked about in the postseason was, she hunts home runs. I want the home run play all the time. And I was like, babe, you got to be okay with base hits. Like base hits are okay too. There's not one. I'm sure, Coach Witten has no issue with the guy that he knows every single time is going to get us on base or is going to be able to bring somebody home. Like, I don't think he's going to turn that guy down, and so you've got to find the value in base hits, and so I think she has done such a great job this summer of finding the value in base hits. Like, that's okay. And I told her, I was like, now don't lose. She is definitely a kid that, we have a less eloquent way of saying it, but she can make sugar out of crap better than anybody I've ever seen in my life. There will be some moments where I'm like, only Fantasia could have saved us in that moment, and so I told her, I was like, nothing wrong. Those moments are still going to come and you're still going to have to be Fantasia James in that moment, but don't hunt those moments that I'm willing to have mass failure for this one moment of possible success. Hunt the consistent success, but knowing that, when that home run moment comes, I'm gonna knock it over the fences, so super, super proud of her summer as well. Judith Valero, she's actually been away all summer. She's playing with her U20 national team in Spain. Right. And she has been kicking absolute butt. That's always it's stressful on both sides, when your babies go back and, they're going through training camp because, with national team, you could be a day from the team getting on the plane and they cut you, and so, her and I are talking and I'm like, all right, you're still there. We're good, so you're, it's like, it's probably as close as I can think of being a parent. Cause I'm like, oh my God, okay, we got to prepare for her. If she doesn't make it, you got to prepare when she does make it, so she made it and she's starting and she's doing really, really well. So they're actually competing for the semifinals tomorrow for U20. So she's been having a really, really great summer. And I'm really excited for her too, because, she transferred in from South Florida. She didn't play a ton her freshman year. And so comes to us and it's, basically freshman year 2.0. Because, I'm a sophomore, but it's a completely brand new system and style of play. So I'm really excited for when she gets back to Miami and getting her back on the court. Because I think, obviously with this summer of growth with her national team, and just, a year of being in our program is going to do wonders for her. And then, last but certainly not least, Paris Atkins. She is a young lady that she's lightning on wheels. She is definitely in person one of the fastest kids I've had the fortune of coaching. And P, her and I have a very good relationship, but we're a very direct relationship, and I think that's what allowed our relationship to become so candid and so close is we both are straight shooters. We both shoot from the hip, and so having that type of relationship with her, it made me even more excited about her coming back, just because, as we mentioned early in the show, in the era of transfer portal, I mean, her market value is outstanding. It's outstanding. Like, let's just, call a spade here. And so it was one of those things where I was like, okay, if we lose her, I do want to make sure she goes somewhere that is going to allow her to continue to have a great career and help her continue to grow as a person, because she's an incredible kid. And so I was like, that was my penance I made with God, that, okay, if I'm gonna lose this baby, I want to make sure she goes somewhere that's going to allow her to continue that trajectory. Yeah. And she came back. I mean, it was so matter of fact, like, of course I'm coming back, coach. Like, what do you mean? And it was like, wow, like it was so refreshing, and it was so solidifying. Yeah, as a coach, because P will let you know, we don't do superstar in our program. Izzy Nada, who just graduated for us, she'll tell you, coach don't do superstar. Like, it's an even playing field. The expectation standard applies to everybody. So great, you got newcomer of the year. Well, you still need to sit down and back in 20 seconds. Like, that doesn't change anything for us. And so understanding of just how unwavering we are with our standards and our expectations, to want to sign up for that again, and not expecting to have superstar treatment, but also wanting to come back, not just for her, because she wants to win a championship. She was like, last year we were hurt, it sucked, but I got to see what you were trying to do, coach. She's like, I got to see up close and personal what we have a capability of doing here. And so this year she was like, we got to go get it in Huntsville. And that, for me, like I said, as a coach, those are the moments you coach for, for a kid to understand that everybody wants to play well. Everybody wants to win. But getting that hardware, that's special. Winning is the only thing that makes you immortal. And so for, P to have that on the forefront of her mind, and you can tell in the way she worked this summer and her leadership this summer, I'm super, super excited to see what her senior year brings.
Would you say this is the biggest turnover from one year to another in terms of roster that you've had here at FIU?
Yes and no. Like I said, I've gotten so accustomed to it just because we've truly built our roster on the portal. We came in during a really unique time in the world, and we had to figure it out fast, and we weren't going to be able to do it with true freshmen. These last 2 years are the first time we were really able to bring in babies. And like, okay, like we got just enough in the tank that, we can actually bring in some babies and allow them to have true freshman years. So it's hard for me to say yes, just because I'm like, man, every year I feel like, well, we're going to bring in 3 juniors, 4 of these, 5 of these. So I think it's probably the largest graduating class I've ever had, which I'm very, very proud of. But I feel like every single year is like, okay, I love what Coach Fernandez, he already says. He's like, we don't do rebuilds, we do reloads. And that is something that's always stuck in my mind, is you don't rebuild, you just reload and you figure it out.
So I guess on that note, just talk about your transfer portal class, a couple of them that really stand out to you and they're really excited to, they've already been able to watch throughout practice and they're excited to see during the season.
Yeah, so I'm really, really excited about Rima Collins. She's a young lady that very, very unique situation in the sense of originally from the Bahamas, but actually went to high school for a little bit in Miami, played for a local AAU team in the Miami Suns. And so a kid that I remember, really, really liking and, knowing how great of a player she is. And so, when I saw that, we had the fortune of being able to recruit her again and, her interest level being high and wanting to contribute and wanting to come to a winning program, I was really, really excited, and I definitely have to give, Coach Yo at Ole Miss a tremendous amount of credit, just because she spoke very highly to not just, who I am as a coach, but just who we are as a program, which was really exciting just because, once you get to know Rima, you understand how important that is, that she's very much a kid that who you are matters much more to her, because she's going to work, she's going to be great, she's going to be coachable, she's going to be all those things, but she wants to be all those things for the right person in the right program. And so I definitely want to give, tremendous credit to her for, really, really expressing to Rima, like, hey, if this is what you're looking for, this is who you're looking for, and so really, really excited about, what her next year could look like. Didn't get a tremendous time at Ole Miss, but I think that's where the transfer portal sometimes cuts both ways. Her and her staff did a great job just bringing in some really awesome pieces there. Back-to-back Sweet 16 appearances. It's just tough. At that level, it's just tough. And so that's where I'm really excited, because sometimes you can get a young woman of that caliber, but when they don't come from winning, it's tough. Because they don't value it. It's not important to them. And that's something that is important to us, and so really, really excited to have someone coming from playing in a great level, for a great team and a great coach, having them transition into our program to help us get things back in the right direction. I'm super, super excited about. And we're fortunate enough to bring in another Bahamian, Danica Lightborn, originally also from the Bahamas, spent her last couple years at Dayton and had two solid years. I think it's just, once again, in the era of the portal, it's just sometimes what one year looks like very different to the next, just depending on who your team is able to acquire, and so really, really excited about being able to have her also join our program, and get her back to a space where she can go back to being her, because the kids, a very dynamic guard that can do some very, very special things. And so I'm really excited to be able to give her an opportunity to get back to herself, with that as well, and then we were fortunate enough to have, Riley Bird coming in from Midland in Texas, very, very good program that in a very good region with a, very good coach who's been there for, forever and a day. He actually coached one of my assistant coaches. So, it's funny when she talks to him, she's like, when is he going to retire? But I love it because I know what type of old school mentality you're coming from, I know he has not changed ever, so it's great now knowing what type of mentality, that young lady is coming in with. So really, really excited about seeing her growth going from the JUCO level up to the Division I level, and, seeing her be able to come, a really big sniper for us, so super, super excited about, her growth in that. Really, really excited about Astrid as well. She's a young lady that, funny enough, we tried to recruit when she was coming out of high school, and in the era of handlers, you have some really great ones and you have some really bad ones, and I don't think she initially had the best one. And so we, missed out. It was a kid that I was, like, man, where did this kid, where did she go? And so spent her freshman year, at Mercer, and, had a typical freshman year, just being honest, had a very typical freshman year. And I think was looking for somewhere that was going to allow her to be able to get back to a different style of play. She initially signed for one coach and then ended up playing for another. And so I think no one wrong in the situation, just ended up not being a great fit, And so super excited about getting her, down here as well. 6'4" kid that is all of 6'4". I feel like she's probably going to grow an inch the next time, I see her. But it's always so such a relief as a coach when you go and pick them up at the airport, and I'm like, please don't be 6'1", please don't be 6, please don't be, don't say you're 6'4", and then I pick you up and we're eye to eye, because I'm nobody's 6'4", so I go, you pick her up in the airport, and I'm like, oh, okay, she's really, she's legit.
Let's go.
So really, really excited to help, have her come in and reinforce our interior, and give us a chance to, really bolster that area with some length and athleticism. Izzy was one of one in what she does, and it's tough. I feel like we're gonna have to create probably another Izzy in the upcoming years, so for us, we want to make sure that, okay, we may not have that battering rod anymore. Okay, well, we're going to have a gazelle now. And Astrid is definitely that kid that I think can really make her give, teams a run for their money from a standpoint of just her mobility and her versatility and her ability to get up and down the floor and transition. And then we've got Celine, who really, really excited about her. Originally was playing for a smaller NAI school in California, is now going to be transitioning to the Division I level. But I always joke with people, you can't teach 6'5". I can help you grow your game. I can help you develop you. I cannot teach you to be 6'5", and Celine, by all means, is every bit of 6'5", and so she is definitely a kid that kind of a throwback scenario in the sense of you look at some of, you watch her game and her film, you're like, how does this kid up in this itty bitty small Christian school? How does that come about? But there, from an international standpoint, you're not always fortunate to have, coaches, or your family is used to doing this process. And so I think for her, when you talk to her, she's like, Coach, I just wanted a chance to play in the States, and I wanted to get better, and I want to play pro, and I want to play for my national team. And so I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense, and so super, super excited about her, because she's going to be coming in still really, really young in her basketball career, but still possessing a lot of things that I'm like, oh man, this kid's got a chance to be pretty good by the end of, when it's said and done. So really, really excited about, her as well. And then one of our two true babies that we have coming in, Grecia Ferrer, originally from Spain. She is definitely similar to Fantasia, is definitely going to be a gray hair baby. I can already tell, because she'll do some things where I'm like, nobody but Grecia can do that. Only Grecia is going to be able to do that. But then she'll do some things where I'm like, don't ever do that. So looking forward to her, her blossoming through her, her freshman year. And then Stu, I'm also really, really excited about a young lady that has had quite a story as far as, I think Stu's played high school. She's originally from Senegal, but has played high school literally all over the country, it feels like, and to be able to do that at such a young age is impressive, and stay the course, and not get distracted by the maybe forced transitions or unexpected transitions in your life. And so I'm really, really excited about her freshman year as well, because she is a kid that she by far is probably one of the most confident freshmen I've coached in a long time. Like, it's one thing she doesn't have is doubt, like, okay, I might mess up, but I know I'm gonna get it done. And that for me as a coach, that's a dream to coach in general, but definitely in someone as young as she is.
Yeah. I did always want to ask you this, Coach Burks. It is the international recruiting. I mean, when it comes to that, you and the program are on pace with the soccer programs and swim and dive for getting the most international talent here to FIU. Talk about how important that is to look overseas and get talent from all over the world. Obviously, how much did you yourself being playing in foreign leagues help in going that route?
No, it helped a ton, being able to have a better perspective, of what their experience is like, being in a new country, new culture, the whole nine. Then definitely my time at the University of South Florida. Coach Randall's and them do a tremendous job in international recruiting. And so that also helped me a lot more with the logistics side of it, because it's great to recruit international. Well, they need visas. They need I-20s, there's taxes. Like, it's not just simple them hopping on a plane and coming to play for your university, Right. And so, being able to be there and seeing that so intimately was like, okay, cool. Like, this is also what needs to happen to make sure that they have a great experience through the recruiting process, so that was really, really great as well. And then now, being at FIU, we are by far the most, and I will ride my horse into the dawn with that one. We are the most diverse university in the world, Amen. And so when you sit here and you look at it, it's like, okay, you definitely want to keep the great players in your state home. Any coach is going to tell you that, you got to keep homegrown home, but you look at also our university, we can recruit all over the world. There isn't one country that we're going to go to that we're not going to be able to let that young lady know that, one, you're going to have a family within obviously women's basketball, where you're going to have other players that intimately understand your experience, but also from a university level, you're going to be able to walk out into the university community and have also another, family link there as far as wherever you were originally from. And so that is such a unique experience, and not every university can offer that. And so why not play into it? And so that's where I love that, with our international recruiting, obviously there is some incredible talent across the water. And I love that we get to bring it to one of the most incredible places in the world. But I love that it's not going to be a one-way street. It's not going to be them coming here. It's the middle of nowhere. They're a one of one. Nobody gets their experience. They're not going to be coming into a situation where it's going to be much more of an adjustment on their side than ours. As opposed to, I love with FIU that they're going to come here and you're going to have a normal transition, whether you were domestic or international, because we have so many great systems in place to allow you to have a normal transition. you're not going to have an international player experience. You're going to have an FIU women's basketball experience. And so being able to offer that to kids, I mean, I think it's what's allowed us to kind of have a cutting edge in the international market.
Yep. All right. So one last question before we get into some fun rapid fire stuff here. But based on what you've seen so far, how confident are you in this iteration of the Panthers to succeed, especially with so much uncertainty in this new look Conference USA with brand new rosters all over, not to mention the 2 new programs in Delaware and Missouri State?
I'm going to use, and this is probably going to be super nerdy, but I'm totally fine with it. One of my favorite quotes from Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. So we're all dealing with it. You know, like no one is immune to it at this point. So who figures it out the fastest? And so that's where for me, you know, it's kind of like, all right, everybody's dealing with this right now. Like, you know, every year it's a new team and, you know, new conference alignment. So since we know that the only constant right now is change, chaos is a ladder and let's see who can climb the fastest.
Kev, kick things off.
All right, Coach. Who is the funniest member of the coaching staff on the team and funniest player?
Oh, man. Coaching staff, we're all pretty funny. And I'm not just saying that to be nice. We all have our moments where it's like, okay, where didn't see that coming. But I'll probably have to say Coach Christelle is hilarious. She is definitely one of the funniest people in general you'll meet, but it is somebody that can find humor in the moment. And so I always joke I just recently joked when we were headed to play UTEP New Mexico State. I was like, you know, she's originally from Ivory Coast. I'm like, you know, so her native language is French. And so I'm like, you're hilarious in English. I can only imagine how funny you are in French. Like, you know, like you're hysterical in English. I'm like, I can only imagine how funny she is in French. So definitely Coach Christelle. She is hilarious to say the least. And then as far as, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Oh, no, you also have to go over the player. Yeah.
As far as a player, I would probably have to say Fantasia.
Yeah, I figured.
She is like, sometimes she's just not even trying to be funny and she's just funny. So it's like, oh my God, but she is definitely somebody that, you know, her little, you know, comeback sometimes will just catch you off guard. I'm like, Fantasia, get the heck out of here. You know, so she is definitely someone that unintentionally a lot of times is really, really funny. Yeah. But then her little comebacks just, it cracks you up, man.
Where is the go-to spot on campus for you to grab a bite to eat?
Ooh, go-to spot on campus. This is definitely not the healthiest, so cut this part out for my players, but I love Chick-fil-A. Look, Chick-fil-A, just they will never make me hate you. Yeah. To me, I would say them and Crepe King, like they'll never make me hate you. So.
That's the second time we've heard Crepe King on
here.
I thought it was the first. Okay.
Oh man, like they will never make me hate you. So I tell our, you know, we do a whole, you know, nutritionist meeting with our players, and then I'm at Crepe King in like an hour. So it would definitely be between those two for sure.
All righty. Who is the GOAT of women's basketball, in your opinion?
Oh man, the GOAT of women's basketball. That is that's a tough one. I would probably have to say, just because of also my age, I'm a huge Maya Moore fan. She was special. You know, she really, really was special. Just her ability to be excellent on both sides of the ball. You know, that's you have players that are great offensively, then you got to protect them defensively. You know, or you have players that I'm like, man, the kid's just a true stopper, but man, she can't hit the broad side of a barn, you know. But Maya was one of those players that just you didn't want to face her on either side of the court, you know. And so she definitely, for women's basketball, would it's hard to deny her.
Yeah, absolutely. Who were you pulling for in this past women's Final Four? Obviously, UConn took it all. I think South Carolina came up short, and then the other Final Four teams, I think, were Texas and UCLA. So who are you pulling for in the tourney?
I was honestly split between UConn and South Carolina. UConn, obviously, Gino, I had the fortune of coaching, if you can call it coaching, against him, you know, depending on the score, when I was at USF. So being able to see that type of dominance up close and personal is incredible. It sucks when you're on the other end of it, but being able to see it live in color, it was like, wow, that's what dreams are made of. So really, love him and respect him, but also Paige. She has just had such a tough journey to get there, and so many question marks. And is she that good? Is she that? And so for her to go and have that run, I was rooting for her. I was like, just, for her to be able to have that final swan song, I was really, really excited for her. Because I mean, that kid had battled a lot to get there, and a lot of doubt, externally, and I'm sure internally, of am I as good as I think and know I am? And so seeing her overcome to, have that swan song was really, really incredible. And then Dawn Staley, I mean, it's hard not to love her. Obviously she was a great player, is a great coach now, but just what she has done for women's basketball from just a player empowerment. You hear Asia Wilson talk about her and their relationship, and it wasn't perfect. It wasn't rainbows, but it was just growing, and so seeing how her players talk about the relationship she has with them. And, it's like I said, it's not this sugar-coated, sweet, it's real, it's authentic, and so for her to be able to let us get a peek into that, has been really, as a coach, has been really inspiring to see that, sometimes as coaches, especially as women coaches, which sounds crazy in a women's game, you feel like you have to shape shift a certain way to be able to reach your players or to get to certain heights of greatness. And I think Dawn has just done such a tremendous job of, be you. Kids want authenticity. That's what kids want. They want authenticity. And she has done such a great job of showcasing that within her program.
What are your favorite FIU women's basketball uniforms?
I mean, Vice. It's not even close. Like I always joke, we talk about how we have to do a count after every single game, because I'm like, man, if somebody gets their hands on it, we're never gonna see it again. And I'm somebody too. So we definitely, that by far is my favorite one by landslide.
If Jesyka Burks-Wiley played college basketball in 2025, what's the points per game? What's the rebounds per game? Assists per game?
If I played as senior Jesyka in 2025, I would probably definitely be getting at least probably 25 a game.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Just with all the hand checking, you can't touch the offensive player too much. I would have made a killing at the free throw line alone. So definitely 25. Definitely rebounds might have taken a hit. I definitely wasn't an athlete by any means. I was just very disciplined. So, but then it's like I look at players like, Rima and Danica who can, off a flat foot can, basically jump up and grab the rim. And I'm like, I don't think on my best day I could have boxed that out. So, I think that my rebounding probably would have taken a bit of a hit there, And then I definitely think my assists would have gone up way more just because, I think just women's players are just becoming so much more dynamic now. And so I think that would have been really, really fun to be a part of that, of, having so many, and I had a great team, great class that I could not have asked for more, but just seeing how the game is growing and just how you've got 6'4" shooting guards, like seeing that type of dynamic, change in our game. I definitely think my assists would have jumped a lot. I think my steals would have been the same because I always tell our kids, I'm not a gambler. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not athletic enough to gamble. So I definitely think the steals would have probably stayed consistent. And hopefully my turnovers would have been down, but no promises there.
Oh, man. Alrighty, Coach Burks, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I'll ask you one more thing here. If you have anything you'd like to say to the fans, to FIU, to anybody in particular, the floor is now yours.
Honestly, I just want to say thank you. Through the ups, the high ups, and the pretty low lows we had, FIU and the community has done a great job of standing by women's basketball. And so I look forward to getting back out there this year with our squad and making everybody proud.
Oh, man. Well, that's great to hear. We'll definitely be tuned in for when and where Hoopla will be. But until then, Coach Burks, again, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you guys for having me.
All righty. So that was episode 104. Again, thank you to everyone who's watching, We already know episode 105 is going to be lit. Don't know the guest, but we'll figure that out ahead of time. But till then, Paws Up!